Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by Ace the HR Exam and Upskill HR. This past year has been a wild ride, not just for HR, but for everyone, but especially human resources. We've had challenges to protect the safety of essential workers, support a remote workforce, reestablish and reinvent our diversity and inclusion initiatives, and push the limits in change management as we try to drag, and I mean drag, our entire teams, especially our leadership team, of people globally through a crisis none of us have ever seen before. As HR leaders, of course, we want to be able to predict the future, see the trends coming, and understand what we should be preparing for 2 months from now, a year and a half from now, 2 years from now, and beyond. In short, this last year has been a crazy shit show. It's been a lot to unpack. I'm excited about our guest today because he's going to kind of help make sense of what the future holds for us. His name is John Ingram. John is a consultant, trainer, speaker, and writer focused on strategic and innovative management. His experience includes 30 years in engineering, IT, change management, and human resources, including HR and organizational development. Currently, John is delivering and facilitating learning through his Strategic HR Academy because he has such a great strategic perspective across HR specialities. I am pleased to get the opportunity to talk with him about how HR leadership is changing, what tools we need as current and future HR leaders, and what the new normal in the workplace looks like. John, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Brilliant to be here, Jessica. I love talking to you and wonderful to be on the podcast.
I know we need to see each other soon. I think we were saying the last time we saw each other was in Chicago, but that's been a couple of years ago.
It has?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your background in strategic human capital management and organizational effectiveness. And this is what I like to call broad but focused, meaning that you've done a lot of deep work in a lot of different areas in HR, but in other places. I'm an HR leader. What do you think I should be focusing on to prepare our workforce for the coming year? What are you hearing?
Well, yeah, everything's changed, hasn't it? So I think it's always a struggle in HR to focus on sort of specific parts, and particularly because I have a strategic focus to what I do. And a core part of sort of making HR more strategic, I think, is about prioritizing on the key things that are going to make the difference. And it's always hard because, whatever changes in the business or elsewhere, we always need to sort of align different aspects of HR towards doing that. So everything's changed. I'd focus, I mean, in terms of sort of the breadth, the different HR process areas I've worked in, I think the organization, that was the focus of my book, The Social Organization, a couple of years ago, was mainly around organization design, because even back then I could see that was a big area that was a lot more opportunity to increase our impact within HR. But I think that's even more so now. And in fact, although I was saying that everything's changed, in a sense, it hasn't. All that's happened, I think, is that we've sort of accelerated a couple of years into the future. So all of the things that were taking place in terms of remote and digital and so on, they've just arrived a little bit more quickly than we thought they would. So, all of those shifts around organization towards more agile and more network base of organizations, absolutely. They were taking place a couple of years ago, but they're absolutely key today.
Well, it's good to hear you say that. I feel like right now, HR professionals are not sure what's next. I mean, I'm not sure what's next. You're not sure what's next, but we're trying to plan for multiple different scenarios. So it's good for you to say, okay, organizational development, that should be a focus, and being strategic. So not trying to do all the things, but picking a few priorities that maybe you can start to build your strategic plan from.
Yeah, absolutely. and that is so difficult, isn't it? I mean, the sort of the increasingly virtual way that we've got to do so much of what we do, and therefore, I think lifting ourselves out of all of the operational requirements, we know that's always been more difficult, and it's probably even more difficult to do now than it ever used to do. But I just think as soon as we have a remote or a hybrid workforce, which then will, I think, increasingly lead very naturally to a more distributed, more asynchronous, more heterogeneous way of working, everything else changes as well. And yeah, I just think the key way of tackling that is to focus on the overall organization, what we're doing, how we're going to do it. And it's organization design and development, I think, which are key to that.
You're not US based. I would be interested in kind of hearing your perspective. Like, how is the vaccine rollout going for you guys over there? And then is there a back to normal that you're hearing about or thinking more about with the HR professionals that you're talking with and your clients?
Yeah, we're a little bit ahead of the US. The vaccine rollout is going very well, which is we've had a difficult pandemic like the States, but things do seem to be correcting themselves again. But like you say, there's so much that we now need to replan for without really understanding what the future is going to be. The good news, I think, is, HR is definitely at the metaphorical table. We're immersed in those conversations because all of the conversations about the future of business are all about people at the moment. And, different organizations are planning different things. There's a certain amount of planning for different eventualities, different scenarios going on, which I think is useful and helpful, and I'd encourage different organizations to do that. But yeah, the worry, I think, or the slight hesitancy which you can hear is when we had the global financial crisis, and particularly because I was sort of fairly new to social media at the time, and I remember blogging and tweeting about the new reset, how everything was going to be different, and I don't think very much was actually. So I'm a little bit cautious, but I do think this shift, this disruption has been bigger and longer and deeper for more people, and I think therefore the likelihood that we just go back to the way that things were before is a lot less this time. So I don't think everyone's going to go back to the office. I think we have got a more hybrid future in front of us. I mean, you asked about what I'm hearing, and this isn't that really, but what I'm saying a lot about and challenging HR practitioners where I hear them talking about going back to the office is, I think a lot of the conversation is about whether the organization as a whole wants people back or not, whether they just want to save on real estate, whether individuals will want to go back or not. And the piece in the debate that I think is badly missing and we need to start focusing much more on is the layer in between. The key to me is the effectiveness of the teams and networks, which actually I wrote about in the social organization again, but are so important now. So, how much do we need to get whole teams back together? How do we do that in a new way whilst maintaining an appropriate level of social distancing? How do we reconnect people through more distributed organizational networks? And how do we use both technology and physical working environments to enable those things to happen? So it's certainly not as simple as full-time office, full-time home, but it's not as simple as organization or individuals as well. We need to dive much more deeply into the way that people actually do their work, who they work with, and then think about how we can enhance and optimize those opportunities through that much more diverse way of working.
What's also interesting is what the employees want to. And this, I want to reference research from SHRM, and this just came out. And granted, SHRM is generally more US focused than has a global perspective, but their research found that half of workers wish to remain remote permanently, which isn't a surprise to me because remote can be really great. Sometimes it can be really lonely, but I do think employers are going to have to think about, as you said, like situationally with different employee groups or different populations, think about, can we have these employees remain remote, or what does like a hybrid model look like for them coming to the office, or do we want to just have everybody come back in all the time? We might lose a large percentage of our workforce to other companies who are offering remote only.
I completely agree. And again, I mean, I mentioned previously that a big part of being more strategic is about greater prioritization. I think another key aspect is around differentiation and best fit. So to me, there are opportunities for organizations to arrive at different answers to that question. You know, it's perfectly acceptable, with the exception of the team and the network piece that I was just talking about, for some organizations to decide broadly that they want to be mainly virtual, and others to want their people to come back to the office, subject to consultation with their staff and the nature of the organization and everything else. But and it's going to be quite interesting how organizations make that transformation, that transition. But certainly heading into the future, I think, because people do like different things, and that can be part of an organization's differentiation and its employer brand, as long as it's focused on providing a compelling environment for the sorts of people it wants to employ. Yeah, so not there's enough people, I think, in all countries, who want a hybrid work style, who want to work in the office, who want to work at home. It's up to an organization to decide, bearing in mind the expectations of the type of people it wants to employ, sort of where it pitches. But it doesn't necessarily have to focus on being able to employ everybody. That's not a strategic approach. So the organizations need to work together with their people and decide what the offer is going to be. But differentiation is good. If an organization thinks it can succeed better by doing something differently to what everybody else is doing, that's a positive. We should look for those opportunities.
I want to just point out one thing that you said: talk to their people. It's not an edict from executive team which says we will all be in person or this is all going to happen. It should be a conversation and involve many different people's opinions and voices. And then, like you said, strategic conversations to determine what is the best decision for a group of people and for the business and for our people, or do we just not want to worry about that, and just move forward for what's best for our organization?
Totally, and I should have said talk with, of course, rather than talk to, but absolutely. If we do far too much to people, but particularly issues which are all about people, it makes no sense to decide on their behalf.
You mentioned a little bit ago about the last financial crisis and how we all said things were going to be different and we're going to make all these changes, and then not a whole lot has changed. What do you think about what's going to happen when we sort of get back to whatever this new normal is? Do you think it's going to be different, or is it going to be the same old?
I think it's going to be different. As I was saying before, I think the change has been significant and deep and long enough to sort of to break with the inertia which is always around and will tend to keep everything the same. Yeah, I think the new normal is going to be very different, or the new normals, because again, I think one shift is going to be that different organizations try and do different things. I also agree with what you were saying earlier, that it's very difficult to predict what that is. We are going to have to progress towards that new future in a fairly incremental, agile, consultative sort of way. But, there are, well, I mean, again, COVID hasn't necessarily completely changed things. It has broadly moved things in the direction we're already going, and we understand what that direction is. We know we are moving towards a more people-centric, consultative, trust-based, purposeful type of business. Now there are lots of different specific aspects to that, and lots of different opportunities within that broader shift. But I mean, the one I quite like and I talk quite a lot about is and I think a lot of people say that a big part of the transformation at the moment is sort of moving away from command and control. I tend not to say that, because I think we actually most organizations left command and control quite some time ago. But I do like this idea of trust and track. So not track and trace, but trust and track. So an organizational environment that understands that because we are now increasingly geographically distributed, it makes sense to be more organizationally distributed as well. And rather than trying to sort of centralize everything and direct things, we do have to accept we're now in an environment where being more open and enabling people to take more empowerment and to be more trusted and to do the things which they see as being appropriate at the point in the organization that they work in. That's to me got to be certainly one of the big aspects of the new whatever it's going to be.
I like that, trust and track. I think that's brilliant. One of the things I wanted to make sure to chat with you about, because I think you're alluding to it, like you talked about being agile and flexible and all these things, but what do you think this last year has taught us about change management? What are you hearing from clients and HR professionals that you're talking to?
Well, certainly for the changes around the pandemic, we've certainly been a lot more agile. We had to be, and therefore we became more agile. And I think part of the task for HR is now ensuring that we do keep that approach as we sort of move through and beyond the pandemic. I think the need for greater people centricity, which I think also occurred during the pandemic because of the need to look after our people. I think we need to grab hold of that and ensure that we take that forward as well, and that it becomes not just a basis for a sort of reactive response to crisis management, but becomes the sort of core of the strategic future of our organizations as well. And then apart from those, well, I mean, I think those shifts were happening already as well. And perhaps linked to those, I think there was a growing understanding before the pandemic that the old traditional top-down sort of waterfall-based ways of doing change weren't being very successful. I'd been calling it for quite some time the Borg model of change. It's rolling up to the organization and telling them that they're going to be assimilated in something, and people don't generally like that. So certainly in the change programs that I've been involved with over the last few years, I've always tried, rather than sort of managing, accepting, acknowledging and understanding that there will be resistance, and then sort of trying to manage and mitigate that, is doing everything I possibly could to ensure that there isn't resistance. I think by the time we've got people's backs up and are sort of standing up and pushing back against the change, then we've largely lost the opportunity. So it's all of the stuff around consultation and communication and building trust and showing empathy and listening and all of those sort of things that we need to do in advance, because we know if we do those, then when we have to do a change, everything is going to be so much simpler.
One of the things I think this last year has really pushed us in some good ways, but just in being more innovative and collaborative differently. We're all dispersed, and we've had to, I hate the term think outside the box, but we've really been tested, I guess, to work differently, run our businesses differently. Have you seen some examples by HR teams that like you would want to share? I don't know if it's an employee experience example, but I was just thinking, like, what are some ways that like innovation in HR that you've seen that's really happened as a result of something that we're experiencing that's so crazy, like the good stuff that's maybe came out of that?
Yeah, I think so. There was one interesting example that actually I was thinking about as I was responding to the last couple of questions, because we were talking about sort of agility and things, and I can probably extend that to employee experience as well. I will say, as a consultant these days, well, firstly, I do less consulting projects because there's a few other things I do as well. And also when I do consulting, it tends to be working with HR and business leaders to help them do whatever they need to do in the organization rather than do it to them. I sort of moved away from that approach quite early on in my career. So I can give you, well, okay, so there was an organization where I was working to help in their early stages of planning an HR transformation. And partly due to the sorts of things I was talking about, they got really interested in the use of agile teams. And I do think that is it's one of the biggest shifts in a lot of HR reorganization that's been going on for quite a few years. But again, possibly because of the increased push to agility during the pandemic, I think it's possibly even more topical now. Yes, they were going to do what everybody seems to be doing these days, which is copying the Spotify model of guilds and chapters and tribes and all that sort of stuff. And this isn't so. This isn't me as a consultant transforming their HR function. This is me as a consultant trying to give them some sort of insights that might be useful to guide them in the most appropriate direction. My suggestion to them was not just to do agile HR, because I just don't think copying sort of standards and models tends to work that well. I mean, I think we've learned over the last couple of decades not just to copy the Ulrich model. From what I see, most organizations that just implement business partners and center of excellence and things, because that's what everybody does, tend not to do very well in doing it. And I think exactly the same thing applies to just, doing agile, because that's what everybody else is doing. So I suggested to them sort of moving towards a sort of horizontal teams where people are working cross-functionally rather than with individual functions. And some of those I think can be agile. And some might be Scrum, and some might be Kanban, and some might be sort of traditional project management. I think that's, again, a much more strategic and appropriate way to undertake effective transformations. Oh, sorry. And then on the employee expectation piece, again, I think focusing on customers works fairly well for agile teams in the rest of the business. I think in HR, we have to be careful in just applying that type of approach, because I think this whole shift towards employee experience is a really, and people centricity is a really useful one. However, I don't think that employees always know what they'd like or what they need. So clearly, I mean, we talked about this before, don't we? We need to do things with our employees rather than to employees. Mm-hmm. We need to consult and listen and so on, but we need to bring in our own insights about what the organization needs. And just because an employee is happy with their experience, also doesn't necessarily mean that the organization is developing the capabilities it's going to succeed. So I think where organizations are moving towards agile and employee experience, let's design the organization together with our people, but let's maintain a level of accountability for deciding what the future of the organization is going to be. It's part of the reason why I really like the idea of product management rather than sort of more traditional agile. HR specialists perhaps take the role of product managers, where they understand the needs and requirements and wants of employees and other stakeholders, but it's down to them to make the decisions what they're going to do. So hopefully some of that was useful.
I think it was great. You're talking, and I'm thinking about an interview we had previously where we talked to kind of about one of our guests' point of view on employees, and his name is escaping me this very minute, but the conversation was about like products. So like external products, like if you're selling widgets or whatever, you have a product officer and a marketing team and a sales team that do all these things. And so his point of view is that HR really should kind of be the champion of the internal product, which is the human capital of the organization. And so he kind of considers himself more of a chief people officer. And so sometimes your internal customers, so your external customers, they don't know what they really need to be able to get the job done, or what they really want. So sometimes there's a lot of stories that have to be told, or dots that have to be connected. So it's an interesting concept that I hadn't really thought of, but it's absolutely correct. And that's why you have these boots on the ground, these HR specialists in these places to kind of help organize the information so that you can put together resources and tell those stories and get them the support that they need, whatever that may be. Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by Upskill HR and ACE the HR Exam. We're talking with John Ingham about strategic human capital management and change management. Personal and professional development is essential for successful HR leaders. Join Upskill HR to access live training, community, and over 100 on-demand courses for the dynamic leader. HR Restart credits available. Visit upskillhr.com for more. I want to talk to you a little bit about Strategic HR Academy. You founded this last year. Can you talk to us a little bit about what this is and why you did it and how you work with organizations?
Sure, thank you. I'd love to. I mentioned previously that I don't do a huge amount of consulting anymore, and so I did 4 years as an HR director. I have been on that side of the of things, but most of my career has been in consulting. Starting with big consultancies where I'd go out to a project and spend a year on a particular thing with a particular client. Over the last few decades, I've been progressively moving towards a much more sort of consultative approach to my consultancy, but also sort of a broader portfolio. So, like you, I do a fair amount of other things, speaking and training and writing and so on.
Yep.
And when lockdown happened, the consulting side was quite difficult as well, actually. But the training in particular, all of my training was face-to-face. That all stopped. I did spend a couple of months doing some full-day training courses on Zoom, which weren't as bad as you might imagine, because, you put more effort into engaging people, and I've got great content and people still enjoyed it. But it wasn't as good as face-to-face used to be. And actually, we live in a digital world. A lot of organizations, in terms of their own learning academies, have been moving towards a more flipped approach for probably about a decade, where the sort of course materials are available, but the real focus is on the chat. and understanding that people's time is valuable, and when we get people together, we should be focusing on the most valuable stuff, which is the collaboration, the social learning, rather than just having people sitting listening to somebody, even to me. So I'd been thinking about doing something like My Academy for a couple of years, but I suppose had faced the typical innovator's dilemma, which is, that you need to sort of cannibalize what you've been doing in the past to do something new, and therefore had never bit the bullet to stop what I was doing, take a couple of months off, and to set up a new digital approach. But with lockdown, that was sort of the decision was made for me, so that's what I did. So the Digital Academy is it's a platform for all of the different learning sessions that I've been running for the last 10 years in a flipped digital approach, and very much focused on strategic HR. So there are other academies around. I mean, the main ones, I think, focusing sort of very much from a technology perspective or analytical perspective. I don't really do that, but if HR practitioners do want to become more strategic, and they should want to become more strategic, and I know we've been talking about that for decades as well, but I still don't see very much evidence of it. And indeed, I think there's a lot of confusion about what it means and how to do it. So if organizations want to take a strategic approach to basically anything that they do in HR, so we go through organization design and performance management. Reward is my own personal favorite, because I think that's the remaining area of HR that has still to be fundamentally transformed. And I've got some tentative thoughts, at least, about what that might look like. So that's the Academy. It's a set of courses, study groups, cohorts undertaking the courses, and memberships as well. So you were asking what the difference is to the other stuff I do. I'm delighted where people just want to come into the Academy and do a course. That's absolutely brilliant. But what I'm really focused on is enabling people to join as members of the Academy, where I can really get to know them, understand what their needs and opportunities are, give them access to the different courses which will be most appropriate towards their own particular areas of prioritization, and guide them in a that sort of consultative way that I've been talking about towards greater strategic impact and better business success. So yeah, that's the Academy. JohnIngham.academy. I hope some of your listeners will go and have a look.
Yeah, well, I love the collaborative aspect. I mean, obviously, I love digital, and I love in person too, and I miss my friends. But I think there's so much value in online learning, not just watching Zoom calls and YouTube videos, like actual collaboration and conversation. It can really broaden your point of view, your circle of people, which I think is really what we need in order to truly be strategic. We need to get outside our bubbles and connect with different ways of doing and different points of view. So your program offers those kind of things, and that's why I'm excited about what you're working on and how many HR people it can help support in the transformation of their business.
Thank you, Jessica. That's wonderful, and I do agree. It's the diversity of people from different roles, different countries as well. I mean, we do have a fairly natural UK focus because that's where I am, and quite a few of the Academy members are from here as well. But we've got people from Australia and New Zealand and US and Canada and Middle East and South Africa. So it's a very diverse group, and I completely agree. It's the different insights and perspectives that more distributed approach that, most of my training used to be in London. So, that tends to be a fairly diverse group of people anyway, but it's not the same. It's where you get that much more geographically distributed set of issues and ideas and being able to tap different things that are going on in different parts of the world. Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely part of the benefits, which I think that digital approach provides.
I am so excited for what you're doing. It's good to catch up with you as well. Where can people go to learn more about Strategic HR Academy and the work that you're doing?
The academy is johningham.academy. If they want to find out more about me more generally, johningham.com. John is just Jon, no H, johningham.com, johningham.academy. I'm John Ingham on LinkedIn, John Ingham at Twitter. People should be able to find me fairly quickly.
Well, we'll link to your LinkedIn, your Twitters, and the various resources that you've shared. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
I so appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Are you loving the Workology podcast? Our Workology community reaches over 600,000 HR leaders every single month. Want to be a sponsor? Reach out to us at workology.com/advertising. With such a large share of the global and U.S. workforce impacted by COVID in the past year, everybody's being impacted. HR and company leaders have had to focus on planning for what we have yet to experience. We've been creating crisis response scenarios and finding our way through new territory and doing it all without a map. Our people are always going to be central to any future planning, and we have to think about how the rapid changes in the past year have impacted them. I know they've impacted me and my team. We also need to think about how we can help them move forward and ourselves. I really appreciate John's expertise and advice here in this interview. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, sponsored by Upskill HR and Ace the HR Exam. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. You can just be tired, and that's okay. This podcast is for you. My name is Jessica Miller Merrill. Until next time, visit Workology.com to listen to all our previous Workology podcast episodes.